Hello, all podcast listeners. Not usually how I start an episode. Just wanted to throw in a quick message as an intro here. The next handful of these episodes are going to be from my archive when this was a show at Trent Radio. Not sponsored, not anything. I own all the rights to all the material that is quote-unquote original. I just wanted to get these out there in quick succession, give you a little bit more content to chew on. Not as polished, but I do like the openness and unedited nature and quality of these episodes. So, without further ado, I hope you do enjoy. Let me know your thoughts as always. The following audio was originally recorded live and broadcast through the facilities of Trent Radio on November 22nd, 2019.
As always, I'm Justin Evangelo. This is Disenabled, the program where we enable the disabled. So happy to be back at it again for all those who routinely listen weekly. And I am also thrilled to have an in-studio guest who, as I said last week, whenever she introduces herself under a new job title, it seems, with different wording. She's been with me from JK all the way to grade 12, helped me graduate, and arguably has taught me more than any teacher I've ever had. We'll delve into that a little later on as the interview progresses. So, everybody, Lanz, great to have you on today.
Thank you, Justin.
Let's start with the basics, like I always do, as you've taught me before. Start with the basics. What jobs have you had working with people who have physical disabilities?
Well, let's see. There's paid jobs and there are unpaid jobs.
All right, let's run through the list.
So our paid jobs would be basically working as an orientation and mobility instructor and intake worker for Canadian National Institute for the Blind in the Peterborough area, and then in the school systems as a teacher of students who are blind and visually impaired.
Okay. What responsibilities let's go chronologically then, as an O&M or orientation and mobility instructor, because you've been out of it for how long now?
20 some odd years.
Okay. So what were your basic duties as...
For working with CNIB?
Yes.
Okay. For CNIB, my basic duty was to teach independent travel training for persons who had vision loss. This would enable them to travel safely and efficiently through the outdoor environment, going shopping, doing their business, using buses, crossing roads, getting to school if they were high school or university students, getting to work if they were people working. And it was basically teaching people skills to use as they go into the sighted world.
Okay. A lot of people take that for granted, I think, or write it off. I'm going to talk about this in future episodes with people who have certain physical disabilities, whether it be hearing or sight impairment. But in your experience, do fully able-bodied people take it for granted in terms of everyday travel? That's something that you may not think about in your day-to-day life, and then when they're not forced to, but when they do see someone with a physical impairment trying to navigate successfully, is there sort of a type of shock that washes over them, or no, I had never really thought about that?
As I think with any type of impairment or disability, people are just unaware. Mm-hmm. Until they come face-to-face with it, as you just mentioned. Yeah. And it just doesn't dawn on them. I think, in a way, we're a very egocentric society, and it's hard for us to get out of ourselves and see the issues that other people might come across. There's a lot of I think, as I've always said, you have to have a good sense of humor.
For sure.
If you have any kind of impairment or disability and you're out in the real world, because you will meet up with people who attempt to be helpful and are maybe not so helpful, not because they just don't understand what you need and they didn't bother to ask you first, or people that maybe just ignore you and just hope you'll go away.
For sure.
Or not be there.
Yeah.
So that because again, not because they're being mean or malicious or anything, it's just that they don't understand. And I don't know, it's like you're an alien from space. I guess they don't know the language.
That's interesting because on previous segments of the show, I've talked about ignorance, and that seems to be my huge key word. And people honestly mistake ignorance for being rude. And no, that's not what the word means. As I've said time and time again, it means lacking in knowledge. And that's where a lot of what you just described, the behaviors come from. And from your perspective, working in an environment where you're teaching someone with a physical impairment how to get around and that they can in fact do it, and it's not as complicated as originally thought, what seems to be the attitude of most of the clients you've had in the past?
Well, going back way to the beginning, when I learned, we were taught at CNIB, and I was immersed into what I guess you would call a blind culture, and which was, I think, the best way to learn. They have since moved it to Mohawk College, I believe, but at that point, right off the bat, I can remember. I'm going off on a tangent here,
no,
Justin. Am I usual?
No, go for it. I mean, I want you on for more than one segment. This is why.
At any rate, we went in. There was 4 of us from different parts of. One from Toronto and 2 from New Brunswick, actually. And we were sitting at a table at CNIB Bayview, and this is where people lived there. They also worked there. They were all blind. We were the odd man out. And I remember first sitting there, and I heard somebody explain to us and said, "Oh, they're the sighted." And suddenly the roles were reversed. I'm not a human being. I'm not real. I'm the sighted. And all of a sudden, everything was different. We had to play by their rules. And to this day, language is so important that we don't talk about the deaf. It's persons who are hard of hearing or deaf.
Right.
Because we're people first. And so when this is a little tangent, but anyways, so right away you begin to learn some of the issues that people that have disabilities face, and it hit you right off the bat. So when we were taught to teach independent travel, we had to do everything under blindfold. We had to eat, we had to do everything, and the instructor said, who was from England, he said, and he was mean.
Well,
He was very adamant that you never take off, no matter what happens, you will never take off your blindfold. And I remember early on, we were in a big building, a McMillan Center, which is like a hospital, and I had the blindfold on, and I was going down a corridor somewhere, and the fire alarm went. And by geez, I never took that blindfold off. And unfortunately, one of the things I noticed was not one person, as they all rushed to go outside, not one person offered to assist me.
Wow.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is when we were taught orientation and mobility, we had to do it because we had to prove to ourselves we could do it. I had to travel all through Toronto, subways, buses, going into stores, etc. We had to prove it to ourselves that we could do it before we knew we could teach it to somebody else. And I think that was hugely important.
No doubt.
Plus, it allowed us to see the issues that people without sight, in my case, would face when they were traveling. So.
Well, aren't those stories interesting? No, it's interesting that you bring that up because putting someone in as much as or as a similar perspective as possible is hugely important because, obviously it scares them half to death. And you really, I imagine, I've never done it before, But I imagine you do get a taste of what it is like to try to at least walk a mile in the person's shoes who has the impairment.
Exactly.
Right.
We can't ever know, and this is why he was so adamant about not taking off a blindfold. We cannot know what it's like to be blind, but we can try and get some of the feelings, try and see the problems that arise so that we can find the skills to help somebody who has a visual impairment overcome those obstacles. And it was very important. And there's nothing like being scared to death out on the roadway to make you very aware of how your student might be feeling at that particular point in time.
For sure, you want to try to put yourself in their shoes as much as possible. And so when you would take people out, would they usually be fearful, or was it a mixed bag of clientele?
Well, everybody's different, and it's quite interesting. I would say mostly fearful, because it is a very frightening thing. If anybody who has ever been truly lost in, say, the bush, in the forest, they will know it's a panic situation. It's literally a panic. The heart rate goes, everything goes. It's a very panicked way of, you'll just stop because you don't know where you are. You have no clue. So most people are panicked, and we start off very slowly, and you start off indoors. However, there are a few cases I've had where they've been the opposite. They've been people who've been either very athletic or very in control, and had professions where they were very much in control, and they felt, oh, well, there's nothing to this.
Right.
And it went the opposite way. But again, you seem to hit a wall first, literally sometimes.
Yep.
And then you start to listen to your teacher.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we come down. But yeah, there's definitely a fear factor.
Of course. And I mean, that's understandable based on what you just said, because of the fact, well, obviously not having sight and then going out into the real world. I think the scariest part about that was your fire drill story and no one helping you, whether that be because they saw the blindfold or because they thought, oh, you can take it off, or it's just a panic.
I think they just rushed by.
Yeah,
I don't even think they noticed, because
right.
I was definitely using the long cane, and I was along the side of the wall. So, but again, look at, once you get over the fear, and once you know how to do it, and once you know how to use your skills, your sense of independence, your sense of being able to say, hey, I am in control. In that situation at McMillan Center, I just remembered what the teacher said, and I just kept going. Yeah. And, I finally asked somebody and just kept going. I just followed where everybody was going.
Yeah, obviously, just followed the crowd.
Just followed the crowd.
Yeah, when in doubt.
So you learn to problem solve.
That's
one of my favorite things.
Yeah, that's huge in the realm of people who have any disability, cognitive, physical, or otherwise.
Yeah.
You gotta, and sometimes that involves huge improvisation. What exactly, if there was one key factor or multiple, what made you make the transition to the academic side of things?
Well, it was quite interesting. A number of us, and it wasn't just myself, there was a number of us as O&Ms in Ontario that made that leap, which was quite interesting, because there was quite a divide at one point between CNIB, who dealt with people in the community, and teachers or academics who dealt with people in an academic setting, but didn't necessarily, they weren't crossing. So they were one or the other. And that meant the student was either one or the other.
Right.
So a lot of us said, well, this is crazy. Let's get into the academic part and bring our O&M and our CNIB and our awareness of what being blind is to the academic world. And I think that made a huge difference. One of these people ended up as a coordinator for W. Ross McDonald, the ministry school.
Wow. Okay.
Susan Howe.
Very significant accomplishment.
A lot of them did really this is what we wanted to do, because their students were either one or the other, and it was difficult. Once they come out of a ministry school, they didn't know anything about the real world, or vice versa, or when, schools in, like if you were to go to your home school in your neighborhood, they didn't necessarily have the expertise to know what to do with somebody who was blind other than teach them Braille. So we needed this crossover.
For sure. So you saw a ton of lacking, let's just say, knowledge, right?
It was all new, though, because all of a sudden these schools opened up. In my time, being a dinosaur, in my career span, this was all new. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we had to find our way.
For sure. And I mean, the way you're talking about it doesn't make it sound like it was already paved. You had to.
That's right.
You had to found it, right?
We floundered along.
Yep. And so, how many years did you work on the academic side, and what exactly was? Because I can never, when someone asks me, and I do bring you up in conversation, believe it or not, from time to time, what was your official job title when you worked in the academic sector?
Okay, in this. Well, different school boards call it different things.
Okay.
So, I would be called, in one school board, I was called vision teacher,
right?
Which I kind of prefer. I like that one. Mm-hmm. At PVNC, Peterborough, Victoria, North Ireland, Maryland, it was called teacher of the blind, which I don't. I wanted them to change.
Can you explain why? I mean, that's an interesting point.
Well, here we go back to what
itself.
I said at the beginning. I don't like being called the sighted.
Right.
Why would somebody want to be called the blind? You are not a person. You are a thing.
Yep.
Or the deaf or something.
Right.
So, yes, language is very important. And I think there was probably a monetary thing, because all their letterhead and everything else was written as that. And then, so they didn't want to change it.
Mm-hmm. So you worked in it for, let's just say, how many?
20 plus years.
Okay, so at least 2 decades, if not more, and you just stepped down in June because you, for some reason, wanted to see me through, which is great. I greatly appreciate that. What prerequisite education was needed in order to get a job like this? Because a lot of people say, well, that's great that we have these advocates and they're doing great things, but for people who want to actually help those with physical disabilities or collaborate with them in a work setting and have a job that's oriented around the field, they don't know what education is needed in order to actually pursue a career like you've had.
Now, that's an interesting one. In the United States, they're way ahead of us in recognizing that people who deal with sensory losses and that sort of thing, is that they're a very specialized group, and they have a specialized knowledge, and they recognize it in the States. In the States, I'd have my PhD and everything, but they don't recognize anything in Canada. So when I went to the academic level, as opposed to CNIB, even though I knew Braille, though I knew all these things, none of it, I was given nothing.
Okay.
So I had already had my teacher's certificate. So as far as education went, if you're going into the educational field, you need to get your your teacher's degree. Then you can go into your specialist degree, where from there you can take courses in, it's called Blind 1, Blind 2, and Blind 3, or at least it was. Mm-hmm. And you take those over the years until you get your specialist. But unfortunately, when you take Blind 1, when I did it, all you got was you learned to do alphabetic Braille.
Yeah.
That was it.
I know where this is going.
And then you were allowed to go and teach. Mm-hmm. So that might have been okay, but if you got somebody like yourself who was in kindergarten, who was an academic student, and that's all I knew was to teach you Braille, then you would have missed a lot.
Oh, for sure.
So now that's changed over again, but you see, that's changed over the years, and it was just interesting because just before I did retire, there were questionnaires that came out to teachers like myself saying, what should we put into our specialist courses? What do we need?
Right.
And so again, it was a learning it's a learning curve for everybody.
Speaking of Braille, this will be definitely tangential, and
Okay.
I wanted to bring this up because I know you can really speak to it because you've been. I don't know how sharp your Braille skills are now, but they had to be when I was, especially when I was in the STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, math type, because as Caleb Hunt mentioned, the materials usually are in a Braille type format, tactile. I wanted to talk to you about this in another segment, but it's come up now. Unified English Braille. People don't really understand.
You just really want to get me started, don't you?
People don't really understand how. Well, first of all, some people don't even know what Braille is. Second, they don't understand that there's multiple codes of it for one language. Can you speak to? Let's go for a general sense so people can, who are listening can get a general sense, and let's not try to delve too deep into specifics. I mean, if you go that way, that's okay. I'm more than willing to talk, but can you speak to, to preface this, there's Unified English Braille, which is basically trying to, as I understand it, put two Braille codes together and change the actual standardizations of Nemeth, which is for math usually, and literary, which is for writing. That's how I explain it to people. Can you speak to how that may be affecting people who have STEM jobs that are sight impaired?
Okay. So we look at Braille, and it started out, everything was, you had text, and when we think back, text was basically just text, no pictures, no diagrams, none of these little side tables and little blocks here and there. And so there was a code, which was a Braille literary code, and it was standard for the English language. We were in North America, the British do it a little different. In fact, all over the world, they do differences.
It's a little bit modified.
Which, at the time, wasn't such a big deal. However, with the advent, then we had Nemeth Code, which was developed specifically for the sciences. And you have to understand how Braille is read, is that it's read one character. Your fingers only cover one character at a time. So in order to be efficient Braille readers, you contract everything. Therefore, we have what we call contracted Braille. It's kind of like writing shorthand. So also we have a memory system. And this is all coming in, but what happened was we ended up with computers and the internet. And suddenly we have a global system. So now people all over the world, again, we're becoming a global community. We realize Braille wasn't accessible. Say our North American Braille wasn't accessible to English Braille readers, to somebody in Africa, to somebody in New Zealand. So they wanted to unify at least English language Braille, which made sense. Mm-hmm. But also we started with the internet, and there was now a need for, we only have 6 dots, and they have to mean everything. They have to mean punctuation. They have to mean letters. They mean numbers or numerals. So, all the math, like operation signs, et cetera, et cetera. So because they only have 6 dots, they've tried to reconfigure, because now we have to have ways of writing internet, what do you call them? You know, me and my internet literacy. It's just the URLs, anything like that.
Yeah, URLs and different things like that.
And then now we have phones, And so what happened was it kind of ran out of dots. So when they tried to unify everything, they came up with a Unified English Braille. And the problem is they sacrifice what's happened is they've sacrificed speed and efficiency and ease, particularly by taking away Nemeth Code. And they're still doing research, and it's very interesting because I keep up with the research, and the research is we can, or you can, I can't, my memory's not that good, but we have 15 seconds and you can memorize 10 or so characters. So when you're doing a math problem, because you have to remember it, we can't just glance down and see the whole problem like I can.
Right.
There is a scientific basis for how much you can remember and how many, and in the sequence, over a certain length of time. And there's a lot of people who disagree with the Unified English Braille for STEM subjects because it puts in too many extra characters, and you don't have that block anymore. So in the States, in Canada, they've adopted it as Unified English Braille. That's what they want. However, in the States, who are so far ahead of us, they have not adopted it. It's still out. They still want Nemeth.
Okay.
On its own. And it's unfortunate because they had a code called NUBS, which was developed with Nemeth code, and it was a far easier system, but they took Unified English Braille. So
I've talked to you about this for countless hours, and as we close this tangent to move on to something else, you talked about how it wasn't so much a hard hit for literary people who had sight impairment who were doing things involving literary writing per se, but a lot of people who were in the sciences and technologies, because if they're using Unified English Braille, which most of them don't, I've talked to a couple myself, then they're forced to use so many other characters and draw out their equations so much longer.
Yes, and you get lost in it just takes longer, it takes more materials. You don't have that block. You don't read math the same. It doesn't sound the same.
Yeah.
Like when we do math, that's why I just refuse to do it with you. That we stayed with our Nemeth code because it's just so much easier to deal with. And it's unfortunate because I think students coming up now will get so bogged down in the Braille code itself, they'll not want to take these subjects.
Well,
and that's
sure.
that's my irritation.
Yeah, you don't want to de-incentivize it by making it unnecessarily hard
difficult.
or difficult.
And that's kind of what's happening, and that's the argument for in the States too, in the United States, that's their big argument. And it's interesting because the people that want to keep Nemeth are the people using it. The people that go for Unified English Braille are the people that are producing the Braille. Two different things.
And are the people producing the Braille fully sighted, or are they?
Yes. There's my other irritation.
Uh-huh.
The users are not getting what they want necessarily. So
it's interesting that people who have full vision or most of their vision are dictating basically the direction and the code that people who have the sight impairment have to use. I don't understand.
But that's because we go into technology. So who are the ones running technology and developing the programs? Mm-hmm. They're the ones that have the sight, and therefore that's why it's going that way, kind of.
All right, we are running a little bit tight for time, so I'll ask one question, and it is loaded. That's why I'm hoping to have you on for more than one segment.
There's only 2 minutes left here.
What's most rewarding? Let's just say what has been most rewarding, because as I've said, you've retired now. What has been most rewarding in terms of working on in the academic field with people who have an assortment of impairments at the end of the day, when all is said and done? What's most rewarding for you as an individual? It's
always the students and their independence, and to see them move on to university or move on out and have the ability to do it and the skills to do it, but also the confidence to do it and to go out, because they're the ones that are going to make others, are the sighted people, in my case, in our case, sighted people or the other people, aware of the fact that just because you have an impairment or a disability doesn't mean that you can't do everything just as well as the next person.
For sure.
You might do it in a different way.
Yeah.
But you can do it. And it's only if you get the right education, you can do it.
Very motivating. Thank you so much, Ann Lanz, everybody. So happy to have you on today. This was a lot of fun and tangential as usual. Thank you so much.
As cliche as it sounds, who knows how different my scholastic career or academic record would have been if people like Ann Lanz hadn't helped pave the way for not just me, but the next generation of blind students coming up through any sort of education system, whether it be Catholic, public, or otherwise. So thank you 1,000 times over. If you're interested in learning more about Braille and the different codes of it, I've linked some basic resources in the description, basic definitions of what each code is, UEB, NUBS. I had to read up on NUBS, really interesting stuff. You can find that in the episode's show notes. Before signing off, I want to give a huge shout out to Maxwell Ivy Jr., co-host. I'm pretty sure he's the co-host. And co-founder of the What's Your Excuse Network, a disability-based podcasting hosting network, for adding Disabled to the roster of podcasts you can listen to. So thank you, Max, for that. Always good to get more ears on the podcast and the content that I'm putting out there, and it's always nice to network and make some friends in a professional capacity along the way. You can find the What's Your Excuse Network on the interwebs at wyexcuse.com, linked below. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, don't forget to share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Listen to previous episodes if you feel so inclined. Rate and review as well. You can reach out to me personally. Let's talk all things disability podcasting or disabled podcasting. How about that? At disenabled.podcast@gmail.com. I think that's all I had to say there. Again, that email linked in the description as well as everything else I mentioned. With the self-promotion out of the way, folks, as usual, until next time, cheers.